At the same time I started learning fear, I also started learning responsibility and disciplines to negate those fears in my risk.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to try out for a team, then I knew if I practiced a whole lot, then it would negate my fear. I wouldn't be as afraid as I would have been if I was unprepared.
Thinkless. What are we not thinking enough about? Join us as we evaluate our thought life. I'm Parker, and I'm here with my co-host, Amber. Welcome to the show.
All right, Amber. What do you... Let me backtrack.
Okay.
What was something that you were thinkless about today?
Easy. Easy. Like
What I was going to wear.
It is.
Is it?
Oh my gosh. It is.
I knew it.
It is. Yeah, like I was totally thinkless in it.
Really?
Yeah. You know, what were you?
Well, I mean, I was actually kind of going to say the same thing. I was going to, mainly because I thought about this last night. I did think about it last night. I was talking with my wife and I was like, what should I wear? What should I wear tomorrow? And she was like, well, you have a jacket that, I don't know, was kind of a Christmas gift that you could maybe wear. And so here we are.
Here we are. Yeah. I mean, it's funny that our whole show is Thinkless. What are we not thinking enough about? And, taking topics like today, we're going to talk about risk and what are we not thinking enough about, and kind of diving into deep thinking when actually both of our answers were so shallow. It's so great.
I'm a human being, all right? I mess up, Amber.
That's the well-roundedness of us right there. It's like, okay, we are extremely deep thinkers, but also we are also shallow thinkers as well. So there's that. But no, yeah. So our topic is
yes. Bring us into it.
Yeah,
bring us into it.
Risk. Like, what are we not thinking enough about when taking risk?
So, in prior episodes, we maybe have, I know I've touched on this, but like, I feel like when I was a kid, I was so curious about so many different things that even the idea of like evaluating or thinking about what could the potential consequences be of this.
That's good.
Did not come into play.
Yeah.
So, of course, I have a 2.5-year-old son, and just whenever he goes from jumping from one portion of the couch to the other portion of the couch, he does not think about the risk that is involved with his body ultimately. Yeah. And it's crazy. You have 2 kids, so it's crazy. Like, I feel like their bodies can bend and mold and shift and could toward in all of these different ways.
I'm pretty certain their bones are like actually rubber.
They have to be.
They're not.
They actually have to be.
They actually are.
Can we get a medical professional really quickly to validate this?
They actually are.
But I just think about there's something that's really innocent and pure, not just in like a child. Yes, of course, but also in the mind of a child where the idea of like, oh, what are the consequences? Like, what's the risk?
They haven't lived enough life to know the risk, of the risk that they're taking are the consequences that they could, assume. I think that's part of our maturity part. So my next question would be, what are we not thinking about enough in risk? What also is associated with risk? Fear, right? What plagues us in our ability to take risk?
When was fear developed in you? As far as when could you almost maybe like pinpoint, man, like there was maybe a moment of when I felt fear or felt afraid?
I'm going to say, I think fear has so many different variances to it.
Totally.
Young, being quite vulnerable here. I was like scared of the dark. So I had fear young as a kid. Like I did not like at night. I wanted a night light when I was younger. Yeah. There's that type of fear. But the fear of reality associated to risk, in my opinion, is failure. So the fear of failure comes with risk. Like the failure that you may not make the couch jump. The failure of you may start something and it not succeed or be what you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I don't think came in my life until maybe junior high when I really started like trying out for things and in sports, and you kind of start getting measured, you know? So you're like, well, I hope I make the team.
Yeah.
You know? And so to negate those things, I also started learning at the same time I started learning fear, I also started learning responsibility and disciplines to negate those fears in my risk.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to try out for a team, then I knew if I practiced a whole lot, then it would negate my fear. I wouldn't be as afraid as I would have been if I was unprepared. So those those lessons kind of came at the same time when I started thinking of taking risk in my journey. Okay, what I'm still saying, those are still not even close. I think most of my adolescent life, I didn't have a lot of fear.
Yeah.
I was that kid that was just like, you can do it, and just went and did it. You know, I wasn't thinking so much fear-based in my youth, really. Yeah. I've always been pretty strategic, what I think is very good in taking risk, to strategize what that risk is going to be. And I think that's probably where if I practice and I do these things, then I won't be as nervous, or I won't be as afraid, or I won't worry as much, because I'm doing it consistently, practicing it, and knowing that how much work I can put in will also help get that reward that I'm ultimately seeking. To take the risk, it's the dangle of the carrot of the reward.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the reason why I ask is because, you know, so much of our how we function now as adults. Yeah. Really, it started somewhere. Yeah. You know, it came because I would say we're not created, or we're not birthed into this world with maybe like the maybe innate fears. Yeah. I feel like it had to start somewhere of when did I first feel fear, or when did I first feel embarrassment? You know, and which then created maybe something in me where risk wasn't something that I was really like comfortable with, because obviously the reality with any risk, I have to get outside of myself in some way in order to take a risk. That's the definition of risk. It's something that you don't know what the outcome would be unless you step into it, unless you step out into it. So the reason why I ask, because I'm thinking of a time in my life where, because while I would always kind of go and do something, the thought of, well, what people would think started in this moment where I think maybe I was, I don't know, let's say 8. Yeah. And we grew up in a Christian valued home. Yeah. You know, we went to church, but I wanted nothing to do with any of that. I just wanted nothing to do with any of it. There was a little, like, have you heard of Vacation Bible School?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
if you're in the South, you've heard of Vacation Bible School.
All right. Well, for our listeners that aren't in the South, I didn't necessarily grow up in the South, but I only went like 1 year, maybe 2 years. But I remember this moment specifically where there was someone on stage, and there were, of course, all of our kids and all the leaders and everything. I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 400 people. Let's just say 500. Let's say 500 for the story. And so they shouted out from the stage, like, "Okay, kids, what time is it?" And my logical brain was like, "Okay, what time? Okay, it's 6:10." Yeah. So I yelled out, 6:10. Like, I yelled, but it was quiet because no one really knew what time it was. I was like, what's the next activity? What's the next thing? Whatever. And I remember yelling at the top of my lungs, "It is 6:10. Like, I remember this so vividly. And once again, everybody was silent because they were waiting for what the person was going to say on stage. Yeah. They heard this young kid, 8 years old, just like yell the actual time. Yeah. And so, of course, some people laughed, some people snickered, whatever. But the main communicator that was on stage, the host, she was like, "No, it's blank." And I remember that feeling of ultimately, first off, people laughing, me thinking, well, like, she asked what time it was.
And it is.
And it is. Yeah. And then she said no, while I it put this feeling of like shame
Yeah.
and embarrassment. Once again, that was really like the first time that I was like, oh, like I looked around at other people that were kind of like pointing and laughing while obviously it was silly and dumb and whatever. But as an 8-year-old, it was still like, oh, you got something wrong. You put yourself out there.
Yeah.
You said something, but it wasn't what it
was supposed to be.
Wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked that question, because I feel like for all of us, every single person listening, watching, whatever, that there are moments in our life where we need to look back and identify when was fear, when was embarrassment, or when did I feel like the consequences of my behavior, my action result in a negative way, which then subconsciously, as we progress in our life, it plays itself out in different ways that it's rooted that we wouldn't know unless we actually maybe go back to the moment of when we first felt it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I don't know that I have a like specific time like that, other than I knew trying to achieve was always something that was just in me. You know, like I always wanted to make the team. I always wanted to be the leader. I always wanted to be the captain. I always wanted to be first place. I always wanted to impress. Like I was always an achiever, you know? And so it was the fear of not achieving that was so great for me. You know, like if I didn't achieve it, I don't know what I thought was going to happen when I didn't achieve it, but it wasn't going to be good. Or it wasn't going to be good.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's to this day. When I started to open, okay, so this coincides. Like, so when I, younger, knew if I practiced enough, did enough, put in enough work, you get the results. Therefore, you get the rewards of whatever you put in. That's the law. That's what happens. That's what you do. But not always does it work out.
Yeah.
And not always is it meant to be in every risk. Not every risk works out. And I think that in itself is fearful of like, you know, what if this is the risk that's not going to work out? Am I going to look like a fool? Am I going to look like I messed up? Am I going to be strong enough to not identify with that failure? You know, all those things. But even starting the studio, I didn't know this world. This isn't the world I came from. It was just something that was laid on my heart to do and to create a home for creatives and good content to be birthed into this world. And I was so afraid of taking the risk of stepping out and doing it, because what if it didn't work? What if I didn't know enough? What if I didn't do enough? And the crazy part was I didn't even know how I could practice enough or put in enough work to learn enough to do it. You know, it was a complete risk, a complete leap of faith. You know, in my opinion, risk without it wrapped in faith is terrifying.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to go talk, let's say, risk in real estate, or you're going to talk risk in business, because that's also where my mind goes to when I hear risk. I think that there's all kinds of ways in business. Your whole scheme is to negate your risk.
Yeah.
Right? I'm saying that over and over and over again in movie making. Like, movie making is 100% gamble. Let's not even say risk. It's gambling. But it is a huge risk.
Yeah.
So a term around here constantly is, how do we negate our risk? What can we do to lessen our risk? Because if I can lay out, okay, well, if we put this, this, and this in place, we're only going to lose, we only are standing to lose this amount, and I'm willing to lose that.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a point in risk that you got to ask yourself, and what am I willing to lose?
Yeah, for sure.
In the risk. Every risk takes sacrifice. So sometimes that sacrifice ends up paying out great rewards. Sometimes that sacrifice, you end up losing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to evaluate what that is and how you negate those risks and take them, for me in my strategic mind, even from a young age, was like, okay, well, if I put in this amount of work, if I put in this amount of time, if I go to this many privates, if I, do all of these things, get the right equipment, will negate my risk so I'm not so afraid.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I was still in fear
Yeah.
of not measuring up to where you're not ever going to get there. I think on an episode that we said, I was like, well, we've started.
Mm-hmm.
And even the morning of us recording the first time was, hey, it's not going to be perfect, but we'll be started.
Yep.
We're going to take that risk.
Yep.
We've got to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to refine something to, you'll never get it perfection, but to excellent, which is a big word around here that we use, is excellent. You have to start.
Yeah.
And getting the faith to do that.
Well, I like the phrase, it's not about perfection, but progression.
Yeah.
Because I think even in risk, obviously with anything, we have to start here, wherever we are.
Yeah.
Like with the resources that we have, with the experience that we have, with the wisdom that we have, with the mindset, ultimately where is here for you or whoever's listening right now for you. Because obviously in the world that we live in the culture and society and the influences and the influencers and all of the different people that we see, I feel like risk can, based off of my experience or lack of, because of what I see somebody else have. So of course, then the comparison then plays a part. It's like, well, I can't do it as good as them. Mm-hmm. But what we are missing for so many different stories is context.
Yeah.
And like context when it comes to the context of risk, we're missing the years of kind of, you were saying, preparation and actually like I have to practice. Mm-hmm. And so that goes back to like, okay, is my risk, is it flippant or is my risk strategic? Is it prepared? Mm-hmm. Like, because yes, with everything there will be sacrifice. Yeah. Like if I put myself out there, then I am sacrificing something of myself that I need to probably hold more loosely than hold tight. And that could be ego. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It could be something material like financials and resource. Yeah. But I think all of that is wrapped up with, ultimately, is my worth attached to this risk?
Yeah.
So whatever the outcome is of this risk, then
it's just the risk.
And it's just the risk.
It's just the risk. It's not you, which it is you that's acquiring the risk, but at the same time, that's what we mean by not having your identity in it.
Yes. So because then obviously if it fails, then do I take that and say I am now a failure?
Yeah.
Versus saying, well, if it's a success, same thing. Same thing. Where, well, now I am a success.
Yes.
Because of whatever risk I took, rather than trying to separate the risk from me and say, no, this is just a risk. Like, I don't know what's going to come on the other side of this, but whether it succeeds or fails, I am who I am no matter what.
Is it weird saying failure?
Is it weird saying failure?
Yeah, I don't like saying it.
You don't like saying it? I mean,
I don't.
It's not, I wouldn't say it's like a word in my regular vocabulary where I'm like, oh, I'm a failure.
I know. Isn't that terrible though? Like in my mind, I so badly, and it's probably the achiever in me, just don't want to fail. But there's so many studies on like how many shots Michael Jordan made or missed before he became the all-time scoring basketball player. Like the failures,
which he's no longer.
I know.
We don't have to get into the LeBron, Michael Jordan debate, but
I know.
He is no longer the all-time scorer. I just want to.
It's terrible.
That is the truth. That is a fact.
That is
data.
It is.
So whatever.
But in my
Continue
mind,
on.
he still is. But yeah, I mean, but it's like all the stats that are shown over and over again about the failures that led to the great successes. But just, I think there's something inside of me that, which is just me, I know not everybody. Failure's not an option. Always look for a solution, even in the failure. So even in the failure, look to say, how did I succeed out of that?
Yep.
Where was the good out of that? Because that's where the change is at. And it still makes the risk worth it.
Yes.
Because whether it succeeds or fails, even in the failure, finding the success in the failure still makes the failure not a failure in my mind. I still succeeded from it. So it's really how you choose to look at how you separate your identity from the risk that you're going to take, how you can say, this is not who I am. This is something I choose to do. This is who I am. And you define yourself by your own definition of identity. Then that risk, whether it fails or succeeds, how you see both of those also determines how successful that risk was.
For sure.
You know, as a person.
Yes.
Not as the entity in itself, but in your own life. How that risk panned out for you. And, you know, you opened with saying and talking about outside of your comfort zone. Risk lives out. Like if this is comfort.
Yes.
Risk is out here. Every time.
Every time.
And could you imagine a life without it?
No. And I know that we either have talked about this or maybe will, but you know, if I stay, you kind of brought up the comfort zone. If I stay within that, I will stay the same.
Yeah.
I will remain with the same mindset, with the same experiences, with the same people.
Yep.
Like, but even this podcast right now, like you and I recently being even introduced to one another to build this.
Yeah.
I mean, that was because of risk.
Yeah.
I mean,
for sure.
Ultimately starting. So I feel like, I could not imagine a life without risk, but also for anyone listening that maybe is like, man, well, how do I take this, because how do I identify how I am living in maybe my comfort bubble?
Yeah.
Because risk will go up against like what feels natural.
Yeah. Because we as people like consistency.
Yes.
We are creatures of habit.
Yes.
So when change comes, when something that we choose to step out and risk, it's like bing, 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 red flags go off on us, right? Like, no. You know, I did a talk one time and I had everybody get up. Like I talked for 15 minutes. And then I told everybody, okay, I'd like everybody to stand up and then I want you to sit on the opposite side of the room. Everybody just sat there. And I'm like, okay, no. Like, I'm going to ask you to stand up, like on your feet, and go to the other side of the room and sit down.
Yeah.
So everybody was kind of like, oh my gosh. They started doing it, and it was taking a few minutes, and they all got to their seats, and everybody was like this. I mean, these are all ages, and they were all kind of like, and then I started talking again like normal. Don't acknowledge it. Don't say anything. Started talking. For a good 2 minutes, they couldn't even hear what I was saying.
Yeah.
Could not hear what I was saying. And I go, oh, please raise your hand if you would like to go back to your seat. Everybody.
Yes.
Everybody was like, me. Like, can we go back? And I was like, we're not going back.
Yeah.
And they were like, we're not going back. I don't even know if they heard the rest of the thing, what I had to say. But the whole thing was, I promise you, they felt what I was teaching was we don't like change. And it distracts us when we have to change.
Yes.
But it is necessary for us to grow and become who we were created and meant to become. We have to be willing to go through the feelings of, I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I like this.
Yeah.
But I promise you that becomes your new seat.
Yes.
And you will love it probably better.
I've heard the saying, change is inevitable, but growth is a decision.
Yeah.
So because things are constantly changing, but it is my decision to how am I going to grow from this rather than just putting up my fists to this.
Yeah.
And so I love that example. I hope someone steals that.
Yeah.
I, for sure, as someone who communicates regularly to mass groups of people, I will absolutely be taking that example because that's so true.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we want success, and everybody defines success differently. And I think it's very important that we all define that for ourselves.
Yeah.
Where, okay, if I step out and take this risk, like right now, my wife and I were kind of in the home buying process. And so we're looking, okay, this is a risk ultimately. We love our home right now, but we're pregnant. And so we want to upgrade a little bit, and so we're looking, okay, well, what can we get? What does this risk look like? But ultimately, for someone that stresses and wrestles over financials specifically, I'm attached from that. Like that does not define me. I mean, just for vulnerability's sake, this is right now exactly what we're having conversation about, where whether we get this home that we really want or not, it's okay, because success for us looks like fostering and cultivating a warm, welcoming space for our family to grow and thrive in, but also for other families to come and experience and grow and thrive in as well.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, we're evaluating the risk.
Yep.
We're being honest and strategic about the risk, but also my worth is not attached to that.
Yep.
And the success in that is finding a space that we can develop a deep culture of love in.
What you said is that identity of what you deem is the greatest reward from that risk, right? Like this has to be there in that, and I would challenge our audience today to think of some way that you could take a new risk. And that may be learning a new language. That may be go to a different coffee shop to study. That may be sit in a different seat at class. That may be reaching out and calling somebody that you should call your mom. You should. Yeah.
That's right.
But you should call somebody.
Yeah, no, that's great.
That's been put on your heart, and it's out of your comfort zone because I don't know what they think. Like, what am I going to say?
Yep.
Like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yes.
Like, you cared about somebody.
Yeah.
Just finding a way to, take a risk. Here we are at the beginning of the year, and, just finding new ways to kind of step outside your comfort zone. I have a friend that just decided to do cold plunges. She's like completely out of my comfort zone, but I am trying to push myself so much to get out of that comfort zone, to take a small risk. There's a thrill in it.
Yes.
And there is something to be learned.
Yes.
100%. And the best part of it is you won't be the same after it. And isn't that daily what we're trying to do? On THINKLESS is think about something you're not thinking enough about. And today's is think about risk. Think about how you can take a risk, what that looks like in your personal life. This is ours. You just shared about your home. Mine is, there's a million, but one of them would be, just
there are more risks.
Yes, lots of risk.
Yeah.
But I love taking risk. But starting something new, even if it's like, hey, I'm going to start wearing colors instead of all black and white. We've talked about that. But I just encourage.
I won't do it.
I know it's so hard. It's so hard. But just encouraging everybody to take risk.
Thank you.
Yeah.